Hey guys, it's the Bottom Line View here, and I'm here to do the top 10 greatest running backs in NFL history. Now, this is a very tough subject to really take 10 of the greatest running backs and narrow them down to that many because there have been so many great running backs in the NFL. And it's not like quarterback where only one of them play during a game. There are many running backs that usually play during the game, so it even makes it that much more difficult because you have to look at more in-depth stats, like as far as attempts and such, and yards per carry. So I kind of had an idea about the top 20 running backs, and then I narrowed them down to 10. I really went hard with the stats. So some things that I'm measuring them on, really, achievements such as MVPs, the most times they won the rushing in one season. Super Bowls don't really count for me as far as running backs because it's very hard for a running back to dictate a game, and it isn't. And the running back is an individual on a team, and the NFL is the most team sport you can get, football. And then just some rare achievements that the running backs have had, mostly stat-wise, and their impact on the team that they were playing on. So we're going to start off with an honorable mention, and the honorable mentions here that I have are Gale Sayers, who I do not have in my top 10 because I don't think he had too long. If he would have played longer, he would definitely be a top 10 running back, but he wasn't able to play as long as these other running backs, and his stats just don't measure up to the others. So it's hard for me to put a guy with such little on the table to put him in a top 10. Now, my top 10 is really tough because I have technically a top 11. My top 10 is really a tie because I have O.J. Simpson and Earl Campbell tied for number 10. Both are similar running backs. They both played with a hard-nosed downhill running style. Big guys, both big, powerful running backs. And if it weren't for OJ's scenario or situation, I think he would probably be even higher. But if I were going to just base it off that, I think I would put Earl Campbell ahead of him. But both are very equal running backs. The only thing that Earl really has over OJ, which is pretty incredible, is that Earl Campbell won 3 MVPs. And he won 3 MVPs, I believe, in 3 seasons in a row. 78, 79, and 80, I believe. Earl Campbell had incredible stats, as well as O.J. Simpson. Earl Campbell had 9,407 yards in his career. He averaged a 4.3 yards per carry and 74 touchdowns. His highest total for a season was 1,934 yards and 19 touchdowns in different seasons. He was a 3-time rushing champion and a 3-time MVP, which was the most impressive about him. Like I said, big, powerful back, and during his prime was nearly unstoppable. O.J. Simpson. O.J. was a 4-time rushing champion and 1-time MVP the season that he got 2,003 yards in 14 games, which is unreal. I don't think anybody in this day and age would be able to get 2,000 yards in 14 games, not even Adrian Peterson. And he got 16 touchdowns. I don't think it was in that season. His career stats, he played in 135 games, had 2,404 attempts, 11,236 yards, 61 touchdowns, and a 4.7 yards per carry. So it's basically Earl Campbell's MVPs. versus O.J. Simpson's overall career. Marcus Allen is my number 9. So Marcus Allen wasn't the greatest runner that the NFL has ever produced, but he's one of the best all-around football players, all-around running backs that have ever played. He was the first player to post more than 10,000 yards and 5,000 yards receiving, so 10,000 yards rushing and 5,000 yards receiving. He won 1 Super Bowl and had 1 MVP. His most yards in a season were 1,759, 1,759, 13 touchdowns, and his career, it was pretty impressive as well. He didn't have a very high average in 4.1, but it's still better than 4, so that's a good average. 3,022 attempts, 12,243 yards, 123 touchdowns, which is pretty impressive. 587 receptions, which is very good for a running back. 5,411 yards and 21 receiving touchdowns. So that's a pretty good balanced running back. Marcus Allen also played fullback during his career when they had Bo Jackson, so that kind of hurt him a little bit. But on their run to the Super Bowl, he was really instrumental in that. Just as you can see by the stats, very hard to not put this guy in the top 10. He's an incredible guy off the field as well, and he deserves to be in the number 9 spot. Number 8, I have the running back right now for the Minnesota Vikings, Adrian Peterson. Now, Adrian Peterson's career isn't over. He's probably got about another maybe like 6 or 7 years left. I don't know how good he'll be for that many years because it's very difficult, especially with the injuries that he's had. Difficult to maintain that physical ability that he really relies on. But Adrian Peterson right now, stacking up versus the greats already. 2-time MVP, 2-time leading rusher. Only in 103 games, he has averaged a 5 yards per carry. He has had 2,033 attempts for 10,115 yards. So he could easily be in the top 10 or top 5 by the time that he retires. He has had 86 touchdowns, and he's not a great receiver, so that kind of puts him a little lower. 206 receptions for 1,697 yards. He has fumbled a bit in his career, 19 fumbles in 103 games. So that's like a fumble every 5 games. His most touchdowns were 18, and his most yards, which was incredible coming off the injury, 2,097 yards. Adrian Peterson, I think, will go down as one of the top 5 greatest running backs, but for now I have him at number 8. Number 7, Eric Dickerson, known as a St. Louis Ram, also played for the Colts. And Dickerson is really underrated in my mind because he's a lot like Adrian Peterson. He had great breakaway speed, long legs. He was a tall running back. He was a 4-time leading rusher, 1-time MVP, 1-time Rookie of the Year also. Attempts, he had 2,996 in 146 games, 1,259 yards, and a 4.4 yards per carry with 90 touchdowns. His most touchdowns in a season were 18, and he also holds the record for the most yards in a single season, as you know. Eric Dickerson, I think, will forever be one of the best running backs of all time. He wasn't always on the greatest team, and a lot of players and a lot of people suggested that his heart wasn't really into football. He was about the money. And I don't know if that is true or not because I'm not Eric Dickerson, so I can't tell you that. But the guy was outstanding, and it would have been nice to see if you would have went to a better place and a better team to play for. Number 6, I have a recent running back, LaDainian Tomlinson. A lot of people underrate LaDainian Tomlinson as well, I find, because if you look at his stats, you're like, yeah, that guy is definitely in the top 10. And then a lot of people undervalue his impact. Really how great of an all-around running back LaDainian Tomlinson was. He modeled his game after Walter Payton. So you can obviously tell that he worked incredibly hard. I remember in Reggie Bush's rookie year, they had Reggie Bush worked out with LaDainian Tomlinson, and he was absolutely bagged from the workout that LaDainian Tomlinson went through. LT, the famous nickname, one-time MVP, two-time leading rusher, most touchdowns ever in one season with 31. That's 28 rushing and 3 receiving. 170 games he played in. That's a lot, and he was good for about 10 of those seasons. I think he had 10 seasons with 1,000 yards. So that just goes to show you how consistent he was. He had 1,300 yards, or 1,300 yards, 13,684 yards. That's my mistake. 624 receptions, which is really good. I think he had one season with 100 receptions, which is insane for a running back. And then he also had 1,000 yards, 1,000 yards in rushing. So he could have easily been the MVP that season. I think that was the same season that Peyton Manning threw for 49 touchdowns. So that may be the only reason he didn't win the MVP. He had 4,772 yards receiving, which is very good. 162 total touchdowns and only 30 fumbles, which is really, really good. I think he had one season with 0 fumbles and a lot of touchdowns. So that's a good touchdown to fumble ratio. His most yards were the season that they lost to the Patriots in 2006 when they went 14-2, the same season that he got 31 touchdowns, 1,815 yards, and the same season, like I said, for the touchdowns with 31. So LT should really be more respected throughout the football community and the football history, I think. Once you look back in about 10 years, you're going to say how great that LT was, because nowadays there aren't that many great running backs, and it's really hard to be a great running back now. Number 5, I have Marshall Faulk. In my opinion, the greatest receiving running back. I really don't think that's much of a debate. 2-time MVP, 2000 and 2001. One-time Super Bowl champion. He could have easily been the MVP in '99 as well. Played 176 games. Had 2,836 attempts. 12,279 yards, 100 touchdowns, and a 4.3 average. So he was a great runner as well, and a lot of people don't think of that when they think of Marshall Faulk. They think of big plays, they think of his receiving ability, but he was also a very good runner. But here is his receiving ability right here: 767 receptions, 6,875 yards, and 36 receiving touchdowns. So that's 136 total touchdowns, 36 fumbles, which is also very good. He played more games. He played 6 more games than LT, which I said he had a very good touchdown to fumble ratio. Marshall Faulk is a little worse on the touchdown side, but he also didn't fumble the ball very much. Most touchdowns in the season, he had 18. Most yards were only 1,382 yards, but his receiving. He had 87 receptions for 1,048 yards. That's insane. That's like being like LT had 100 receptions in a season, but Marshall Faulk had 1,000 receiving yards in a season. That is incredible. Marshall Faulk well deserved to be in the top 5, and a lot of people really undervalue his impact because as Bill Belichick said, in one of the books, I believe it's called Patriot Reign, and Bill Belichick is going over his strategy for the Rams in the Super Bowl, and he really said that Kurt Warner isn't the quarterback of the St. Louis Rams. The quarterback is Marshall Faulk, and in order to shut down the Rams, you have to shut down Marshall Faulk. And I think that really made a lot of sense because all that he did for the offense, receiving-wise, rushing-wise, he was the true quarterback, the true MVP, as Kevin Durant would say, for the St. Louis Rams. Number 4, Emmitt Smith. Some people may get mad in this placement. I'm not sure, but this is my list, my personal opinion, and this is not for sure top 10 running backs of all time. Please comment, by the way, on what you think about this list. I'll say that also at the end, but Emmitt Smith, 4-time leading rusher, 2-time MVP, 3-time Super Bowl champion. Very impressive right there. Played an incredible 226 games, which a lot of people don't give him credit for playing that long. It's really hard to play in 226 games as a running back, taking that much abuse. 4,409 attempts, but that is also the reason why a lot of people don't give him credit for being as great as he was, for posting 18,355 yards, which is the most of all time. But if you look at those attempts, that's an amazing amount of attempts. He wouldn't get, if he had the same amount of carries as other people, he wouldn't have got that many yards. He had 164 touchdowns, and he did fumble 61 times. 4.2 average, so that's not very good. Even behind that great offensive line that he had in Dallas, that average isn't very good, but you can't take away the stats that he had. Nothing can take away that, and that's enough to put him in the top 5. The most yards he had in the season were 1,773 yards, 25 touchdowns in one season, which is really good. He also had 3,224 receiving yards, so that's also good. But like I said, he's not the most electrifying. He's very straight, hard-nosed, tough running back. Wasn't the most athletically gifted. He was a very smart player, and he could just take so much abuse. And you got to give him respect for that. And I have him at number 4. Number 3, Jim Brown. Now, a lot of people have Jim Brown as the greatest running back of all time, but I'll go on for reasons why the other 2 players are greater than Jim Brown, in my opinion. But Jim Brown, for all that he has done for the game, right now, really he doesn't need to keep talking about certain subjects, but he put a huge impact on the game. He was a 4-time MVP, 8-time rushing champion, 126 touchdowns, 57 fumbles, 12 game. He only played in 12 games per season. Also, he had 118 games played with 2,359 attempts, 12,312 yards, 106 touchdowns, and a 5.2 yards per carry, which is really incredible. The most yards he had in a season were 1,863, and in a separate season he had 17 touchdowns. The reason really that hurts Jim Brown in my opinion, is that at the time that he played, the defenses were a lot smaller. The linebackers were smaller than he was, which really gave him an advantage to run over people, basically. The guys they maybe were athletic, but they weren't as insanely strong and fast that they are today. There's only a rare guy like that. So Jim Brown was the size of a linebacker, but had speed like the fastest player on the field. So it really gave him an advantage. Number 2, I have Walter Payton. Walter Payton was a 3-time MVP and Super Bowl champion, 1-time Super Bowl champion. Played in 190 games, had 3,838 attempts and 16,726 yards, which was the record until Emmitt Smith broke it. He rushed for 110 touchdowns and had a 4.4 yards per carry, but what made Walter Payton so great was that he was a great runner, but also a very good receiver, and in my opinion, the greatest all-around running back of all time. He had the most yards he ever had were 1,852, and the most touchdowns were 14, and he had that in 2 seasons. So what I'm talking about with his receptions, he had 492 receptions for 4,538 yards and 15 touchdowns, which was very good for the time because at that time a lot of running backs didn't catch the ball as frequently as he did. And he did have some issues fumbling, though. He had 86 fumbles in his career, even though at that time as well, I got to say that it was easier to fumble because the rules were different, and it was easier to even the fields were different because there weren't as many artificial turf fields. There were a lot of grass fields, so like Jim Brown, those guys, it was easier for them to fumble throughout their career. His yards per carry isn't that impressive, but he had a pretty lengthy career. He had 190 games, just like Emmitt Smith had 226. So those are the 2 highest, I think, on this list. Yeah. But sweetness is number 2 for me. Just all that he would do for his team. True MVP of the Chicago Bears throughout the years that he played, and many look at him as the greatest running back of all time. But my greatest running back of all time is Barry Sanders, the Detroit Lions running back through the 90s. Every single year that he played, he rushed for 1,000 yards. He was a 4-time rushing champion and a 2-time MVP on a team that was garbage. He played for a team that had no offensive line and had no quarterback. He was the team. He was the offense. The only reason they ever made the playoffs was because of Barry Sanders. The only reason they beat the Cowboys was because of Barry Sanders. He played in 151 games. He had 3,602 attempts, which is not even close to Emmitt Smith's 4,409 attempts. His yards per carry were 5, just like Adrian Peterson. The yards that he posted were 15,269, which could have easily beaten Walter Payton's 16,726 in at least in the bare minimum 2 seasons. Or sorry, the maximum 2 seasons. He wasn't the greatest receiver, but only because they didn't throw the ball to him very often, and their quarterback was garbage, so they didn't throw the ball very much anyways. He had 352 receptions for 2,921 yards, which is respectable, and 10 touchdowns. He is the only, or he has the most 1,500-yard seasons in his career of any running back. The most, or his yards per scrimmage is 18,190. I forgot to finish that. 109 touchdowns and only 41 fumbles, which is pretty good. He had a 2,000-yard season in '97 where he literally carried the team. I don't know how anybody could have the most negative rushing yards and then the third, I think it's the third most rushing yards of all time. That just goes to show how bad his offensive line was. He would rather break a big play or go for negative yards. The most touchdowns he ever had was 16 because, honestly, they wouldn't score very often, or he would be taken out for a goal line back. So you're taking out the greatest running back of all time just because he's smaller for a bigger guy just to plow into the end zone. But Barry did more than just his stats say, because if you turn on a Barry Sanders highlight film, you really get to see how electrifying he was on the field. He made moves that no other running back could make, and it was all pure ability. Nobody could do that. Nobody could learn to do what Barry Sanders does, and that's what makes him the greatest running back of all time. If you were to place him on the Cowboys during the 90s, you'd have easily eclipsed Emmitt Smith's rushing yards, and probably would have played longer, probably would have won more Super Bowls for the Cowboys. And I feel sorry for him that he had to play for Detroit as long as he did, which is why he probably retired, but he keeps that unknown. So if you guys enjoyed this video, if you guys enjoyed the top 10 greatest running backs greatest running backs in NFL history, please let me know. Like, subscribe, comment. Comment another top 10 if you guys would like to see me do another top 10. And I'll be doing more videos in football as football approaches. I really don't want to get into my predictions for the season this soon because it's pretty soon and training camp hasn't even started yet. But I've already kind of gone through on paper what their seasons are going to look like, what teams are going to do well and such. I'll also probably be doing fantasy football, so if you play fantasy football, I'll be giving tips on my channel. So if you guys like this video, like, subscribe, like I said. This has been the Bottom Line View. Peace.